For the record, today is October 4th, 2009. The location of this interview is the Villanova Conference Center in Villanova, Pennsylvania, I guess. The name of the interviewer is Jeannie Marie Christie. The name of the interviewee is?
John Cox.
And your date of birth, John?
25 September 1944.
And there are no other people in the room, and the war and the branch of service you were with?
Vietnam War, United States Army.
And your rank, sir?
Captain when I left service.
And the locations that you served?
In Vietnam would be Ben Hoa.
Let's start from the beginning and go back a little, and we'll jog your memory first, and then we'll go through with some of the experiences that you had. So talk about whether or not you were enlisted or drafted, and why.
I was in graduate school and got a telephone call from my father one day saying that graduate school deferments had been abolished and the famous lottery had yet to start. So I basically enlisted to go to officer candidate school a month or two ahead of being drafted.
Okay. And where were you living at the time?
Tucson, Arizona.
And is that the basic reason you joined? Because the government draft was coming?
Yeah, I would have liked to have finished my master's, but the draft was coming and I didn't want to go in as an enlisted man. So.
Why did you pick that particular branch of service?
I think I remember distinctly talking to both the Air Force and the Army, and I think the Army came back first. And there's historical precedence in my family for serving in the Army too. My father was in the military, in the Army.
World War II?
Yes.
Do you remember where he served?
Germany, Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
And Japan too.
And Japan.
Yeah.
Do you recall the first day of being in service in the military?
I remember being inducted in Phoenix, Arizona. All of us theoretically were volunteers, and the Marine Corps needed people, so they went down the line saying, 1, 2, 3, you're a Marine. And I was not a 3.
So you stayed with the Army.
And then they put me on a plane and flew me back to Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Do you remember how you felt at that point?
Anxious, probably a bit scared, but on the other hand also very curious as to what was ahead.
Okay. Boot camp or officers candidate school. What was that like?
Basic training and advanced individual training at Fort Dix, and then officer candidate school at Fort Belvoir, New Jersey. That was tough.
Why? Can you explain?
A lot of stress put on the officer candidates to see if they break. That was one of the ways they had of weeding out people that they didn't want serving as officers.
Okay.
So.
How long were you there?
I think it was a 9-month program. Graduated in August of 1969. You know.
Did you have a special class that you belonged to at that point?
It was funny, when we were at AIT at Fort Dix, orders would come down periodically for who was going to Fort Sill for artillery, or Fort Benning for infantry, or Fort Belvoir for all the other branches. And it was simply the luck of the draw which place you went for officer candidate school. And at officer candidate school at Fort Belvoir, they were putting people into all the other branches of the service. Mm. They ranked the class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They went to the Pentagon, who came back to them with a list of requirements for officers at that point. They went to the number 1 in the class and said, which one of these do you want? Okay. And they cross that out and they call in number 2 and say, what branch do you want? I selected ordnance. My family had been involved in armor and shells in the steel making process for years, so I thought it might be interesting. And then I wound up in vehicle maintenance, which was not what I signed on for.
How did you get through the experience?
Of Fort Belvoir,
Uh-huh.
I mean, Officer Candidate School. I don't think I ever really considered dropping out. It was just one of those things that you had to do, and the concept of not completing it just wasn't there.
Okay.
So,
All right, let's talk a little bit now about your wartime experiences. You went to Vietnam.
yes.
How did you get there?
I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground teaching military instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a phone call from the post adjutant one day saying, "What's your leave address?" And I said, "What do you want that for?" He said, "Well, we're cutting orders for you to go to Vietnam." So I went home to see my wife, and she said no. But I went out to California, flew out of Travis Air Force Base. Interesting thing was that people that were coming along as shortly after I left, a week or 2 weeks, were being pulled off the tarmac at Travis saying, "Your orders have been changed, we don't need as many people in Vietnam." So I was maybe a week or 2 weeks ahead of myself at that point. Flight flew to Hawaii. The officers all got off and went into the officers club at the Navy base, had a drink, got on the plane and landed at Benoit after dark, which was unusual. And they put us on a bus with wire screens over the windows, and that was when it really hit you that you were in country.
What was your job assignment when you first got there?
I was assigned to the maintenance company of a composite support battalion for the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cat Division. Initially, I was shop officer for the maintenance shop, then was moved fairly shortly after that to be executive officer of the company. And I was off paying the troops who were scattered field support teams all over the area, and came back from a helicopter flight one day that the company commander had gone back to the U.S. because of a death in the family, and the next thing I knew I was the CO of the company.
Can you describe a typical day for me, if you can put it together?
Being a support unit in the rear, we basically had a very quick morning formation after breakfast. The troops would all then go out to the maintenance shop. I would take care of paperwork, which was incessant, and then go out to the maintenance shop and see what was happening there. I think I was also battalion mess officer, which meant spending a lot of time in the kitchens and checking up on that.
Okay. And then evening hours? Or?
Evening, unless there was something super hot, super critical, would be through at dark. A couple of us had, somebody purchased a Monopoly set, so we played Monopoly, we played card games, anything just to pass time away, and then bed.
Okay. Were there any memorable experiences that stick out in your mind while you were there?
Oh, there's several.
Could you share one or two?
I remember one day, actually it was in the evening, that one of the battalion vehicles had broken down outside the gates of the compound, outside the gates of the base.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed someone to head the convoy that was going out with a wrecker to pull it back in, and they asked me if I'd do it. And I think it was really the only time I was ever outside of the compound after dark in what everyone called Indian country. And that was invigorating, I'd say. It was scary, yeah.
In what regard?
You basically, it was dark.
Mm-hmm.
You were with a convoy of about 5 or 6 trucks with a wrecker and 5 or 6 men that had to hook this vehicle up, get it back inside the gates of the base as quickly as possible. And you did not know what was 10 or 15 feet on either side of the road. Mm. So just, you never knew what was going to happen next.
Now you mentioned there were a couple things. Second incident?
I remember getting a note from the battalion executive officer one day saying that we had the battalion barbecue that day, and we had a lot of trouble finding charcoal.
Why?
Not the kind of thing that you just went into your Kmart or something like that and picked up. This was the sort of thing that happened every day.
Mm. Where did you find it?
Somebody went off the compound and bought it from the local Vietnamese.
Okay.
Came back with a bag of charcoal.
Success.
Steaks were frozen. They had to be thawed. They were tough. But all the battalion officers were together, and it happened once a month.
Okay.
So it was my turn.
And that was a good experience.
Yeah.
Good. Let me ask you about your awards and medals. I know you have several. Which ones do you have, and how did
Basically, I received a Bronze Star for meritorious service, which meant essentially getting your job done, keeping your nose clean. I don't think I did anything that was particularly valorous or anything outside the normal. But that, of course, and service awards, which anybody that was there got.
Okay.
You know, so that's basically it. Nothing
beyond that.
Nothing beyond that, really. No.
All right. Do you have any very memorable experiences about Vietnam other than the two that you mentioned?
I do remember driving through areas where the Viet Cong had been and seeing what they'd done to some of the villages, just virtually burned down, destroyed. I remember when I first got there, sitting down in a hooch, which is the building that we lived in, thinking that 5 miles away there was somebody that would very much like to see me injured or killed. And there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. It was completely happenstance or chance or luck or whatever. And we were occasionally rocketed or mortared. And they had counter battery radar, which would try and find out where the rockets or the mortars were fired from.
Okay.
But you had to get permission from the province chief to fire into his province, and that usually took a half an hour, and by that time, of course, whoever had fired the rockets was long gone.
Okay. Anything else you can remember?
Well, we had a couple of people in the company that started getting flags sent to them from their states, and I rode off to Barry Goldwater because I enlisted from Tucson, and about 3 weeks later I received in the mail a letter signed by him and an Arizona state flag.
Is that the only flag you had while you were there?
I had a South Vietnamese flag too.
Okay.
You know, which we had hooch maids and people that ran the company, sort of bar, that would go off the compound every night and come back in the next morning. They occasionally were caught taking things out with them. But if you asked them to get something, they could come back in with it. I started a collection of South Vietnamese officer insignia that they would get, and gave one to my mother-in-law when I got back, who took it into a jeweler to have it put on her charm bracelet, and turned out it was gold. If I'd known, probably would have bought more back.
Yeah.
But you know, what else did I have? Because the maintenance shop that we ran did all of the small arms repair, we would occasionally get communist bayonets and gunner's quadrants and things like that, which people were taking back for souvenirs.
Did you bring any of those home?
I brought a Chinese gunner's quadrant back.
Describe it to me.
Basically, it was a round dial with a base underneath that it would be put on the base or the side of an artillery piece to measure angles as to how far the piece was being elevated, which would help them in trying to direct fire. In a nice leather case.
You didn't have problems with the mildew on the leather?
I think we probably kept that next to a light bulb,
Okay.
which is another interesting thing.
Tell me
You
about
kept
that.
a light bulb in your closet because everything would mildew if you didn't, and it was just enough heat to keep things from forming.
Okay.
The hooch maids would take your dirty uniforms and they'd take them into the company showers, and they would stop the drains, fill up the shower, throw the uniforms on the floor, throw in a handful of soap suds, and then beat them with their feet. And when they were through, they'd take them out and hang them up, and that was how you got clean clothes. And some of us developed little spots of jungle rot, I think probably from the feet,
Okay.
which as soon as I came back to the U.S. disappeared.
Huh. Chance of that. Anything else that you can think of while you were in Vietnam that's memorable?
I was there fairly late, and we did have some instances of drug use. My Jeep driver, officers are not allowed to drive Jeeps, at least not officially, was a very, very intelligent guy from Boston, and he was caught in a drug urinalysis test, and he swore to me that he had smoked some marijuana, some pot, but apparently it had been laced with heroin.
Mm.
And he was gone.
Okay.
But drugs were a problem toward the end. I don't remember race problems, but there were drugs around. And we would have surprise urinalysis where everybody in the company would line up, and you couldn't leave the company area until you produced a specimen, and then a couple of days later the results would come back. I think my company was fairly clean, but we always had one or two that would show up.
And then you were out of there.
Yeah, they would go to a detox center. And I think even the officers had to give a urine sample before they left country.
Okay.
So if you came up positive on that, you were in trouble.
Ah. Let's shift gears then, and we'll come back to this Vietnam experience at the end. But think about your life and how you stayed in touch with your family. You mentioned you were married at the time.
Married with 2 children. We obviously could exchange mail.
Mm-hmm.
We could send it free. They all sent through the Armed Forces Post Office. Occasionally, if you were lucky, you could get a radio telephone hookup, which was always a problem for my wife because she wouldn't remember to say over. So we would talk, and I'd be through, say over, and she'd talk, and then she'd stop, and nothing, and then she remembered it. That's another interesting point. The Easter invasion in 1972, she did not hear from me for about 3 weeks because we were very, very, very busy at that point. The North Vietnamese were, just on the other side of Saigon, and Pirates Peak and Fish Hook or whatever it was called. And the daily routine stopped completely. We were out test firing weapons, not just for maintenance, but for protection of the base.
Mm.
So we were busy for a couple of weeks there, and she just didn't hear anything at all.
That made her very nervous?
Yes, particularly because the North Vietnamese invasion was in the news.
Yeah.
So,
did that give you stress and pressure, additional stress and pressure, do you think?
a little bit. I think there was concern that Chinese, North Vietnamese tanks were, 30, 40 miles away. That doesn't make you sleep that much easier at night.
True.
But there's nothing you can do about it. So I guess she developed almost a sense of fatalism after a while. That if it happens, it happens. There's nothing you can do about it.
Did you have problems with any supplies while you were there?
Spare parts was always a problem. We were in the process of Nixon's policy of Vietnamization, which meant we were turning things over to the Vietnamese army. And they were also very, very light-fingered, that things would disappear. We'd throw out batteries and they'd disappear 2 days or 2 seconds later. But nothing chronically short other than certain spare parts.
Okay.
I think, you know.
Did you have a good luck charm while you were there?
I honestly don't think so.
Anything that you did to maintain your morale?
I used to run.
Okay.
I'd run around the compound
Okay.
just to get some exercise.
How many miles, or do you remember?
15, 20 minutes every day or so, if I could get away.
Can you describe running through that compound at this point yet?
You had to stay off the main roads because there's a lot of vehicular traffic.
Okay.
So you'd be just on paths, what have you, side roads. Hot, didn't take long to get a sweat up, but when you were through, you felt as though you were sort of physically tired as well as mentally tired.
Okay. What was your temperature like during the day usually?
Hot. When the rainy season came, it was incredible. Huge cumulus clouds would go up at 2:30 in the afternoon. The heavens would open, it would pour down rain for an hour or so, and then it would stop and the sun would come back out. And then it was hot.
Did you have paved roads or mud roads?
Paved roads for the most part, you know, we were part of a perimeter that included Benoit Air Force Base.
Okay.
So they were wrapped in with us. So most of the roads were paved.
Because of the Air Force?
Yeah, well, they were there first, I think.
Yeah. What did you do to entertain yourself? You mentioned you played Monopoly and cards. What other things did you do? Were there entertainers there?
The Bob Hope show did come through at Christmas of '71, but we could only send about 5 people from the whole battalion.
Okay.
So that was out. I think basically I read a lot. The only command prerogative I ever used was that there was an organization in the U.S. that sent boxes of paperbacks in, and those would come in once every other week or something like that. And I told the mail clerk that those boxes would only be opened in my presence, so I could get first grabs at anything that came in that looked like it was worth reading. But that's that and the Monopoly and Pinochle were about as much as we could do. There was a movie theater, but I remember they had, the screen was a sort of a side of a building that was painted in gloss white paint. So the projection wasn't very good, and it wasn't really worth it.
Do you remember any of the books that you read?
Anything I could get my hands on that just was remotely interesting. Anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. People often do humorous pranks and have funny things happen. Do you remember any pranks that were pulled or funny incidences while you were there?
I honestly don't think so. It was fairly routine day in, day out, with the exception of the Easter invasion, when a lot of things happened. People went out and did their jobs. I guess the only thing I remember was I had a maintenance officer that ran the artillery repair section of the maintenance shop, and he used to love to hook up a 105 howitzer behind his Jeep and drive it all over the base, so that the Vietnamese spies that were inside would try and figure out where the next artillery position was going to be set up. And he used to love to do that, just to keep people confused.
Now, you talked about the invasion. Do you want to elaborate on that at this point?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how we first heard about it, but I do remember waking up one morning and hearing the particular distinctive whine of F-4 Phantoms, which we'd heard when we were in Tucson, because there's a big Air Force base there. And overnight, a squadron or two of Phantoms had been flown in from the U.S. There were some 155 howitzers, which hadn't been around, which all of a sudden showed up. Because I had a maintenance shop, I got a message that a bunch of TOW, which was a wire-guided anti-tank missile, people were flown in, and they told me that they were put on a plane in the States and not told what their destination was going to be until they'd taken off. And they wanted a dust-free, controlled temperature and humidity shop to set up and calibrate all their equipment, and it didn't exist. But all of a sudden, all of this came in. We had to go out and clear brush away from just outside the berm line, go out and check the barbed wire and the claymores. So it was fairly intense and serious for a while. We did not know what was happening. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Let's kind of move on a little bit. Now, you mentioned you do have one photograph.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me about that photograph?
Basically, there was a thing called a chain of command board, which every company was required to have, and it had photographs starting with President Nixon. I guess the next person would be the Secretary of Defense, and then Secretary of the Army, and then whoever was in charge of USARV, or United States Army Vietnam, all the way down through the brigade, battalion to the company. And being the company commander, I had to have my photograph there. Of course, it was the bottom one on this chain. And a photographer came along one day and took it and gave me a couple of copies of it, which I still have.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the one you're going to?
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. And special insignia on the uniform that day? Or
Basically, captain's bars, ordnance bomb, unit crests, and what are called leadership tabs, which were a green felt thing that was stuck on each shoulder, and the company commanders would have those.
Okay.
You can see those in the photograph.
Any favorite fellow soldiers, officers that you can think of or remember at this point?
Since I left, I think I've only seen one other person that was in the whole battalion. There were some great people there. The warrant officers were old, crusty people that had been in the Army forever, and they were superb. My first sergeant was a little bit of an alcoholic. The second one was as superb a non-commissioned officer as I've ever met anywhere. But the couple of lieutenants, nobody that I really have kept up with
Okay.
since.
Do you remember any other names?
Sure. Yeah. Lieutenant Albert was my executive officer. One of the, actually the warrant officer that pulled the howitzer all over the base was Warrant Officer Strickland. I wish I could remember the name of the first sergeant. I would dig that out and commend him.
Okay. Well, if you think of it,
I will.
you can tell us. Let's move on to after service then.
Right.
And do you recall when your service ended? How did it end? How did you come home?
Well, I was part of the Nixon drawdown.
Okay.
And Nixon would say, I want, on the 1st of July, I want only 50,000 or 70,000 people left in country. The whole 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cav, which was left there by itself, came back at the end of June of '72. Orders just came out every day. They didn't know what to do with us. I was sent back to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, which is where my wife had stayed. And they came to me and said, do you want to be released from active duty? And I said, if I am, what happens? And they said, well, you'll land in California. You'll out-process there for a week, and we'll give you a plane ticket back to your home of record, and then you're a civilian again. But at this point, I was married, had 2 children, and no job. So I said, no, I think I'll take a permanent change of duty station. And they said, okay, we'll send you back to Aberdeen. Got back to Aberdeen, and about 2 weeks after I'd been there, I walked into the post adjutant's office and said, you know, if I can find a job, what do I have to do to get out? He said, well, you've accepted a permanent change of duty, and you owe us a year here. So there I was, and I had a very, very good colonel. I went back to work in the post plans office, which was a lot of operational planning, protocol work. we would get a call that 6 Argentinian colonels were flying up to Aberdeen to go through the weapons museum or something like that, and the office I was in had to lay on a lunch for them with the appropriate person there to make sure that we didn't serve them the wrong kind of food. The kind of job that if everything went right, nobody knew you were around, but should there be a slip up, all hell broke loose. I did that for a year. The colonel said, when you find a job, I'll let you go. In September, October of '73, I got a job with U.S. Steel and refratted, released from active duty.
And did you go back to school at all? You mentioned you had been in a master's program.
No, at this point I was married with 2 children, and finishing the master's just wasn't an option.
Okay.
You know, couldn't.
So you didn't use your
myself.
GI Bill at all?
No.
Okay. Did you make, obviously, some good friendships while you were there?
In the service?
Uh-huh.
Yes. A couple of people that I went through officer candidate school with would be the few that would really stick in my mind. As far as the service in Vietnam, not really.
Okay.
People came in and left, rotated in, rotated out. I got to know some of them fairly well, but just nothing.
Okay. When you came home or finished and went to work at U.S. Steel, how was the transition for you?
I have to say I never went through any kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, anything like that. It was, had I gone to U.S. Steel directly from Vietnam, it probably would have been different. But in Vietnam, the focus was on getting the mission done. You did what you had to do. If you broke some regulations, but it helped the mission, so be it. Come back to essentially a peacetime army where the way you did things was critical, even if you didn't get the right results. And it was two different armies. And the second one was not as much fun or as challenging as the first one. So leaving that was not really a problem.
Okay. Did your experience in Vietnam influence the way you thought about the military?
I was never, I have to say, anti-Vietnam War. I just felt it was something that we were there. As an American citizen, I owed it to the country to do it, and I did it and came back, and that was it.
Okay.
I liked what I saw in Vietnam much more than I did when I came back to Aberdeen, as far as the way that the Army operated.
Did you belong to any veterans organizations afterwards?
Never did.
Did you go to any reunions afterwards?
Never did.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I did have to join the first CAV association. That was required when I landed in Vietnam.
Ah.
They gave us a nice little pin and a wallet and a certificate, and I suppose I'm still a lifetime member of that.
Did your service experience affect you in any way, do you think?
It certainly affected the way I thought about work, in that getting the job done rather than how you went about it was much more important. I think it made me obviously a much more mature person. At one point I had about 190 people working for me. Millions of dollars of equipment that I personally signed for. And that's sobering when you're a 26-year-old person. Probably had more responsibility then than I've had after that for a long time. So, and you're responsible for people. Became very sensitive to the people that were in the company.
Did you lose any people from your unit while you were there?
Not killed. We had some that were wounded. I remember going into Field Force Hospital in Saigon to visit them in a Jeep with a machine gun mounted on the top, on the back. We also had a contact team at Vung Tau, which was at the in-country R&R center for the first CAV. And I had to go down and visit them once or twice. but a couple of people wounded with minor wounds, but nothing serious.
Okay.
It was more a situation of people would rotate in and out
Okay.
as their year ended, and then somebody else would come in.
Okay. Anything else you would like to add? Anything else you want to add?
No, I would say that I don't regret the experience in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
I know some people felt that they were throwing years away by serving in the military, but I don't feel that at all. It was an experience I look back on. Glad I did it. I would not want to go through it again, but I don't think it was wasted time.
And you said your father was in the service, you've been in the service.
And my son, my middle kid, went through ROTC and served with the 101st Airborne.
Okay. So your experiences helped understand his experience.
Oh yeah, sure. And I think that he saw what I did. The option, for instance, of going in as an enlisted man was just not there. It was with your education and background, you should be an officer. And he was.
Good. Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Well, I thank you very much for your interview,
Yeah.
and I look forward to putting
Whatever.
this on.
Yeah.
Terrific.